Eliza wiped down the counter for the third time that evening, her muscles aching from the endless shifts. It wasn't a glamorous life, working double at the diner while juggling odd jobs just to keep the lights on. But Eliza had long ago made peace with it. What other choice did she have? Her adoptive mother, June, was sick, and the medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. It was late, and most of the regulars had already shuffled out into the cold night. She was preparing to call it a day when the bell above the door jingled. Eliza turned, expecting to see another tired face looking for a late-night cup of coffee. Instead, it was Bianca, a waitress from a fancier joint on the other side of town. She was all too familiar with the contrast between them. Bianca's uniform was crisp and tailored, while Eliza's apron had seen better days. But there was no competition, they played in different leagues, and Eliza knew it. Bianca made a beeline for the counter, her heels clicking across the floor. "Hey, Eliza," she said, her voice holding that easy confidence of someone who never had to worry about their next paycheck. "I've got a gig for you." "Well, not me exactly, but I told them you might be interested." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "What kind of gig?" Bianca leaned in a little, lowering her voice. "It's for the Ashfords." Eliza froze. The Ashfords were more than just rich, they were untouchable, one of those families whose name carried a certain weight around town. They owned properties, businesses, people. Eliza had heard stories, the kind that lingered in hushed whispers, affairs, shady business deals, people disappearing. The Ashfords didn't live by the same rules as everyone else. "Wait, the Ashfords? You want me to work for them?" Bianca nodded, clearly unbothered by the gravity of it. "They're throwing some huge party at their mansion this weekend, and they're short on staff. You'd just be serving drinks. Easy money, and they pay ridiculously well. More than what you make here in a week." It was tempting. The thought of walking out of the diner with a fat check after just one night of work, something that could make a real difference in paying off June's medical bills, was hard to ignore. But the Ashfords? They were trouble. She wasn't about to forget that. "I don't know, Bianca," Eliza said, hesitating. "I've heard things about them. They're not exactly normal people." Bianca rolled her eyes. "Look, it's just one night. You go in, smile, serve champagne to some rich people, and leave with a stack of cash. Easy as pie. I've done it before, and nothing weird's ever happened to me. And you need the money, right?" Eliza knew Bianca was right about one thing. She did need the money. Desperately. But her gut told her this wasn't just another serving job. The Ashfords didn't live by anyone's rules but their own. That was dangerous. "I'll think about it," Eliza finally said, not committing but also not turning it down. Bianca smiled, as if she knew that Eliza's hesitation was only temporary. "Don't wait too long to decide. It's tomorrow night. Let me know by morning." She slid a folded flyer across the counter. "The details are in here." After Bianca left, Eliza stuffed the flyer into her apron pocket, her mind already buzzing with what June would say. As she cleaned up and locked the diner, her thoughts kept drifting back to the offer. Easy money. One night. Maybe it would be worth the risk. Back at home, June was asleep, her breathing labored in a way that had become all too familiar. The doctors said she needed better care, more treatments, but all Eliza had was what little money she scraped together working extra shifts. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the flyer Bianca had left behind. The Ashfords. Just the name gave her a chill. But wasn't a night of discomfort worth it for a month's rent? For June's next round of medications? She had to at least ask. The next morning, June was up early, shuffling around the kitchen like she used to before the illness slowed her down. Her hair was pulled back, and her faded floral robe hung loosely around her small frame. Eliza waited for the right moment, knowing the conversation was going to go exactly the way she expected. "Morning," Eliza said, pouring June a cup of coffee. "Morning, sweetheart." June smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "You're up early for once. Diner didn't need you this morning?" "Not yet," Eliza replied, sitting down across from her. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." June gave her a knowing look. "That's serious, huh? Let's hear it." Eliza hesitated, but there was no point dancing around it. "Bianca came by last night. She offered me a serving job for the Ashfords." The change in June's face was immediate. Her brows knitted together, and she leaned back in her chair. "The Ashfords," she repeated, her voice laced with concern. "Eliza, that family is nothing but trouble. You know the stories as well as I do. I don't want you mixed up in their world." "I know," Eliza said quickly, "but it's just one night. They pay really well. It could help with the bills, she let the sentence hang, not wanting to remind June of how much she needed the help. June's expression softened, but the worry was still there. "I understand why you'd want to go, honey. But people like the Ashfords, they don't play by the same rules as us. Once you get involved, it's hard to get out." "I don't like it." Eliza nodded, guilt gnawing at her. But in the end, practicality won. "It's just one night," she said again. "I can handle it." June looked at her for a long moment before finally nodding. "If you're sure, Eliza. Just be careful. Promise me you'll keep your head down and get out of there as soon as you can." "I promise," Eliza said, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it herself. The next day, as she walked up the long, winding driveway of the Ashford mansion, Eliza couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. The house was enormous, more like a palace than a home. Everything about it screamed power, wealth, and secrets. She straightened her shoulders, reminding herself she was here for one reason only: to get paid and leave. Eliza stepped into the Ashford mansion, eyes wide, heart thudding a little too fast in her chest. The sheer size of the place was overwhelming. Opulence dripped from every corner, from the glittering chandeliers to the polished marble floors that stretched endlessly in every direction. She had expected wealth, sure, but this? This was a whole different world. She inhaled sharply, reminding herself why she was here. It wasn't to gawk at the decor or rub elbows with the elite. She was here for one thing: the money. Money that could help June. "Keep your head down, serve the drinks, get paid, and get out," she repeated to herself. Dressed in the uniform they provided, a sleek black dress with a white apron, Eliza moved quietly, balancing trays of champagne flutes with practiced ease. The guests, decked out in gowns and suits that probably cost more than a year of her salary, barely noticed her as they mingled and talked in low voices. Snippets of conversation reached her ears: politics, art auctions, business deals. It was a language she didn't speak, a world she didn't belong to. Still, there was a strange fascination in watching them, like observing some rare species in its natural habitat. She couldn't help but be curious about their lives, so far removed from her own reality. As the night wore on, Eliza found herself wandering through the mansion's expansive halls, her tray growing lighter as guests plucked glasses from it. It wasn't exactly hard work, but the strangeness of the environment, combined with the constant sense of being an outsider, was wearing on her. Her feet carried her past the ballroom, deeper into the quieter areas of the mansion, when something caught her eye. A portrait, large and imposing, hanging on the wall of a dimly lit corridor. It wasn't the painting's size or craftsmanship that stopped her in her tracks, it was the face. Her face. Eliza blinked, her breath catching in her throat. It couldn't be, she thought, stepping closer. But it was. The little girl in the portrait had the same round cheeks, the same wide brown eyes, the same dark hair falling in loose curls over her shoulders. She looked to be about 5 years old, maybe younger. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Why would her portrait be hanging in this house? How could it be here at all? She didn't remember ever having been in the Ashford mansion, let alone sitting for a painting. Yet there it was, a piece of her childhood frozen in time on the wall of a house she had no connection to, or so she thought. Eliza reached out instinctively, fingers brushing the cold surface of the frame as if touching it would make it real. She felt a cold knot form in her stomach, unease rippling through her. She glanced around the empty hall, half expecting someone to jump out and explain, but there was only silence. Suddenly, a noise from the far end of the corridor made her spin around. Her eyes locked onto a man standing in the doorway. It was Leonard Ashford. He stood there, tall and commanding, dressed in an immaculate suit that screamed wealth and power. But his face had gone pale as a sheet. For a moment, neither of them moved. Eliza could see it in his eyes, recognition, disbelief. His gaze flicked between her and the portrait, as though he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Then, as if some terrible realization had washed over him, Leonard staggered forward, clutching at his chest. "She's come back," he muttered, barely audible, his voice hoarse with shock. "After all these years." Eliza's breath hitched as she watched his face contort with pain. Something was wrong, seriously wrong. Before she could even process what he had said, Leonard crumpled to the floor, gasping, his hands still clutched over his heart. "Help!" Eliza screamed, dropping her tray and rushing toward him. She knelt beside the patriarch, her hands shaking as she tried to do something, anything. "Someone help!" Within seconds, a wave of footsteps thundered toward them. A swarm of staff and security flooded the corridor, followed by guests who had heard the commotion. A woman pushed past the others, kneeling down to check Leonard's pulse. Eliza felt herself being pulled back, but she resisted, her heart pounding as she watched the scene unfold. Leonard was lifted onto a stretcher by 2 of the staff, his face ashen, his body limp. The same woman who had checked his pulse barked orders into her phone, "Call the hospital, now." Before she turned back to the staff, her expression grim. "He's having a heart attack." Eliza stumbled back, her own heart racing as she watched them carry him out through the front entrance, sirens already wailing in the distance. The other guests whispered furiously amongst themselves, their eyes darting between Eliza and the empty space where Leonard had collapsed. They were staring at her. Why were they staring at her? Her hands were trembling as she turned back to the portrait. The little girl's eyes seemed to bore into her, an eerie reminder of whatever just happened. What did Leonard mean, "She's come back"? Who was he talking about? The weight of it all came crashing down on her as she realized what had just happened wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. The portrait, Leonard's words, the heart attack, it felt like some twisted puzzle she hadn't been prepared for. She wanted to run, to escape the strange suffocating feeling creeping through her chest, but her feet felt glued to the floor. Someone touched her arm, and Eliza jumped, startled. "You should leave," a voice said gently. It was one of the servers she'd met earlier in the night, his face kind but concerned. "You've done enough for tonight." Eliza nodded, barely processing his words. Without thinking, she allowed herself to be led back through the winding halls and out of the mansion. The night air hit her hard, cold and sharp, and for a moment she just stood there on the front steps, watching as Leonard Ashford was loaded into the back of an ambulance. She could hear the faint echo of his voice in her mind, "She's come back, after all these years." Eliza sat at the small kitchen table, staring blankly at the steam rising from her mug of coffee. A week had passed since that night at the Ashford mansion, but she couldn't shake the memory. The portrait. Leonard collapsing. His strange, whispered words, "She's come back, after all these years." It played over and over in her mind, as if her brain refused to let it go. June had noticed her distraction, but Eliza hadn't told her the full story. What could she even say? She wasn't sure she understood it herself. The more she tried to push it aside, the more persistent it became, gnawing at her like an unsolved puzzle. Her shifts at the diner had been the same blur of monotony as always, but now, when she zoned out during a long afternoon serving coffee, her mind wasn't on bills or June's medical appointments. It was on that portrait. And the way Leonard Ashford had looked at her, like he'd seen a ghost. I should just forget about it, she muttered to herself, sipping the now lukewarm coffee. Rich people and their drama. None of it has anything to do with me. But as much as she told herself that, she knew she was lying. There was something there, something connecting her to the Ashfords in a way she couldn't explain. The portrait alone was impossible to ignore. Why was there a painting of her, as a child, in that house? She shook her head, as if the motion would physically dislodge the thoughts, and stood up, rinsing her mug in the sink. June was still asleep in her room, her breathing heavy but steady. At least today wasn't one of the bad days. Eliza was about to settle into her usual routine when the rumble of a car engine outside drew her attention. She glanced out the window, expecting to see one of the neighbors. Instead, a sleek black car was parked in front of her house. A car that did not belong in their modest neighborhood. Eliza's stomach twisted as she watched a man in a dark suit step out of the car and approach her front door. Everything about him screamed lawyer, from his perfectly tailored suit to the leather briefcase he carried in one hand. A knock echoed through the small house, and for a brief moment, Eliza considered ignoring it. Pretend she wasn't home, wait for him to leave. But she knew better. With a sigh, she opened the door, and the man flashed a practiced smile. "Miss Eliza, right?" he asked, his voice smooth and professional. Eliza's brow furrowed. "Yes. I'm Marcus Green, representing the Ashford family." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. "Leonard Ashford has recovered from his recent health scare. He has requested your presence at the Ashford estate to discuss some personal matters." Eliza stared at the card, her fingers gripping it tightly. "He's demanding to see me?" Marcus's smile didn't waver. "He has requested a meeting, yes. He believes it is of great importance to both him and yourself." Eliza felt a surge of irritation rise up. It wasn't enough that they had wealth and power beyond what she could even imagine, now they thought they could just summon her like some servant. She didn't care how rich Leonard Ashford was, she wasn't going to let anyone tell her what to do. "No," she said flatly, handing the card back. "I'm not interested." Marcus blinked, clearly taken aback. "Perhaps you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Eliza cut him off. "I don't have time for whatever games the Ashfords are playing. Tell Leonard I'm not coming." The lawyer stood there for a moment, as if unsure of how to proceed. His smooth demeanor cracked slightly, but he recovered quickly, nodding once before slipping the card back into his briefcase. "Very well, Miss Wright. I'll relay your message to Mr. Ashford." He turned on his heel and walked back to the car without another word. Eliza shut the door behind him, leaning against it for a moment. Her heart was racing, adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She couldn't believe she had just said no to one of the most powerful men in the city. But as the initial rush of defiance faded, doubt began to creep in. What if there was something more to this? What if he really had answers about that portrait? About her? She shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. No. She wasn't going to let herself get sucked into their world. Whatever it was, it couldn't be good. Rich people always had hidden agendas, and she wasn't about to become a pawn in their game. Still, as she moved through the rest of her day, the nagging curiosity wouldn't leave her alone. What did Leonard want with her? Why was he so insistent? And most of all, why did he look at her like that, like she was someone he'd been waiting for? By the time evening rolled around, Eliza's resolve was starting to crack. She sat on the couch, flipping mindlessly through channels, but her thoughts were elsewhere. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was a burning need to know the truth. What was she missing? What was it about that portrait that tied her to the Ashfords? I shouldn't have said no, she muttered under her breath. She could feel the weight of her decision now, the missed opportunity gnawing at her. The next morning, just as she began to wonder if it was too late to change her mind and go to the mansion, the familiar rumble of a car engine reached her ears again. She glanced out the window and felt her breath catch in her throat. Another sleek black car, but this time, the man stepping out wasn't a lawyer. It was Leonard Ashford. He looked different now, pale, worn down, but still somehow exuding that quiet, commanding presence. He made his way slowly to her door, moving with a certain caution that spoke of his recent hospital stay. Before she could fully process what was happening, there was a knock. Eliza hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. She opened the door, and there he was, Leonard Ashford, standing on her doorstep like an apparition from that strange night. "Miss Wright," he said, his voice softer than before, almost humble. "I know you've refused to meet with me. But I've come here personally to ask, for just a little of your time. Please." Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, her mind reeling as she stared at Leonard Ashford. The last person she expected to see on her doorstep was the patriarch of one of the wealthiest families in the city, let alone looking so vulnerable. His once imposing figure seemed diminished, and the pallor of his face betrayed the toll his recent heart attack had taken. "Miss Wright," he said, his voice low but steady. "I've come to ask for your time. Just a little. Please." Eliza's instincts told her to shut the door, to walk away from whatever mess this man was about to pull her into. But something in his eyes, something that wasn't there before, something raw, held her still. She hesitated, feeling the weight of curiosity pressing down harder than ever. "Come in," she said before she could stop herself. Leonard nodded, the lines of tension around his mouth softening just a fraction. He stepped inside, his movements slow, like every step required more effort than he was used to. She led him into the small living room, which felt even smaller with him in it. He seemed so out of place here, among the worn furniture and the cozy clutter of her life. But then again, everything about this situation felt wrong. Leonard sat down carefully on the edge of the couch, folding his hands together in his lap. Eliza sat across from him, watching him closely, waiting for him to speak. "I don't know where to begin," he started, his voice sounding almost defeated. "But I know you deserve answers, even if you don't yet know the right questions to ask." Eliza's pulse quickened. "You're damn right I deserve answers. What happened at the mansion? Why did you collapse like that when you saw me? And what did you mean when you said, 'She's come back after all these years'? Who are you talking about?" Before Leonard could respond, there was the sound of shuffling footsteps behind her. Eliza turned to see June, her mother, entering the room. She was in her robe, her face lined with sleep and the weariness that had become all too familiar over the years. But the moment June laid eyes on Leonard Ashford, she stopped cold. Her expression shifted from confusion to something like terror. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the back of a chair for support. "June, what's wrong?" Eliza moved to her side, but June's wide-eyed gaze remained locked on Leonard. The color drained from her face, and for a moment, Eliza thought she might faint. "It's you," June whispered, her voice trembling. "It's really you." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest as she looked between them. "Mom, what are you talking about? How do you know him?" June's breathing quickened, and she placed a shaky hand on Eliza's arm, as if to steady herself. She turned to face her daughter, her eyes full of guilt and something else, fear. Eliza, she began, her voice barely above a whisper, there's so much I should have told you. So much I wanted to protect you from. Leonard leaned forward slightly, his expression full of a strange mixture of pain and regret. You did what you thought was best, June. But the truth always finds its way back. Eliza's patience snapped. Enough of this cryptic crap, she said, standing up and facing them both. What the hell is going on? What are you hiding from me? June closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. You're his granddaughter, Eliza. The room went silent. Eliza stood there, staring at June, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. It didn't make sense. It couldn't. She looked back at Leonard, who met her gaze with a grim nod, confirming June's words. You're lying, Eliza said, her voice hollow. You have to be. I wish I were, June said softly. But it's the truth. You're not, you weren't born Eliza Wright. Your name was Olivia Ashford. Eliza felt the air leave her lungs, as if the ground beneath her had just shifted. Olivia Ashford? Her brain scrambled for a foothold, for some shred of stability in a moment that felt unreal. No, Eliza shook her head. No, you're my mother. You raised me. I'm not. I adopted you, June interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. When you were just a baby. You were left at the orphanage, and I took you in. I loved you as my own, because you are my own. But you came from the Ashford family. You were lost after the accident. They thought you had died. Eliza stared at June, her chest tightening with confusion, disbelief, anger. She felt like she was drowning in the weight of their words. She turned to Leonard, her voice barely steady. An accident? What accident? Leonard sighed heavily, rubbing his temple with the tips of his fingers. Your parents, my daughter and her husband, died in a car crash when you were just a child. The wreck was horrific. We were told no one survived, but, somehow, you did. By the time we learned you were alive, you were gone. Taken to an orphanage, then adopted. Eliza felt her knees tremble. She sank back into her chair, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of it all. It felt like someone had ripped her life out from under her and replaced it with something she didn't recognize. I don't remember any of this, she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. You were so young, Leonard said quietly. Just a little girl. The memories, they must have faded. But I never stopped searching for you. I thought you were gone forever until that night at the party, when I saw you standing there. And the portrait? Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Leonard nodded. That painting was of you, Olivia. It was done when you were just a child, not long before the accident. Seeing it again, seeing you, after all this time, it was too much for me. My heart couldn't take it. Eliza pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to ward off the headache forming behind her eyes. This was too much. It was like some cruel twist in a soap opera, but it was happening to her. She had grown up believing she was someone else entirely. How was she supposed to deal with that? I need some time, Eliza said, her voice shaky. I need to think. June took a cautious step toward her, reaching out a hand. Eliza, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't know how. Eliza pulled away, her thoughts swirling too fast to keep up. I don't know if I can believe any of this. Leonard stood, his face etched with sorrow. Take all the time you need. I know it's a lot to take in. But please, know this, we are your family. And we will be here, whenever you're ready. Eliza watched in silence as Leonard Ashford walked out of the house, leaving her standing in the wreckage of her entire world. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window without really seeing the view. The room felt smaller now, suffocating with the weight of revelations that refused to sink in. She could hear June in the next room, moving quietly, trying to give her space, but the silence only seemed to press harder on her chest. Her life, everything she thought she knew, had crumbled in a single conversation. She wasn't Eliza Wright, the girl who grew up in this small house with an overworked, kind-hearted mother who took her in. She was Olivia Ashford, the daughter of people she had no memory of, the granddaughter of one of the most powerful men in the city. It felt like someone had swapped her entire existence while she wasn't looking. Across the table, June's tearful confession echoed in her mind. "I never wanted to hurt you, Eliza. I thought keeping the truth buried would protect you. When I first saw the news, when the Ashfords were searching for their lost granddaughter, I didn't want to believe you could be her. But deep down, I had my suspicions." Eliza pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to keep the headache that had been building since Leonard left at bay. Suspicions. All these years, June had suspected the truth and never said a word. She had been adopted from an orphanage, a toddler without a name, and June had pieced together the possibility that she could be the Ashfords' missing heir. But she'd kept it to herself, convinced that revealing it would only complicate things. Maybe it had been out of love, but that didn't make it any easier to swallow now. Footsteps approached, and a moment later June stood in the doorway, wringing her hands nervously. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her face pale. "Eliza," June began softly, hesitant. "I know you're angry with me. And I don't blame you. But please understand, I only wanted to protect you. When I adopted you, you were this little girl with no name, no history. I didn't know where you'd come from, but you were mine the moment I held you. And when the Ashfords started searching, I was terrified they'd take you away. I couldn't lose you." Eliza turned slowly to face her. The anger had been simmering under the surface since June admitted the truth, but now, seeing the genuine fear and sorrow in her mother's eyes, it flickered, dimmed. "I'm not angry, Mom. Not really." Eliza's voice came out quieter than she expected. "I just don't understand why you didn't tell me sooner. I had a right to know." June nodded, tears pooling in her eyes again. "I know. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I can see now that I was wrong. I was selfish, Eliza. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want you to be swept up into that world, the world of the Ashfords. They aren't like us." Eliza thought back to the mansion, the opulence, the wealth that seeped into every inch of their lives. June wasn't wrong about that. The Ashfords lived in a world so far removed from her own, it was hard to even picture herself as a part of it. But the portrait, the painting of her as a little girl, told her there was no escaping that truth. She had come from their world, whether she liked it or not. "I don't even remember them," Eliza said after a long pause. "I don't remember my parents, or the accident, or any of it. It's like it's all just gone." June wiped at her eyes, sniffling. "You were so young, barely more than a toddler. It's no wonder you don't remember. And after everything, after losing them, it's possible your mind just blocked it out." Eliza looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of those words. She hadn't just lost her parents in a tragic accident, she had lost her identity, her entire past. She wasn't even sure who she was anymore. "They thought I was dead," she said quietly, the words sounding strange as they left her mouth. "Leonard, my grandfather, he thought I was dead." June nodded, sitting down across from her, her voice trembling as she spoke. "The accident was horrific. When I saw the reports on the news, I couldn't believe anyone had survived it. And by the time they realized you were missing, you were already here, with me. I know now that I should have told them. I should have reached out. But I was so scared of losing you." Eliza could see it in June's eyes, the fear, the guilt, the love that had driven her to keep the truth hidden. And yet, as much as she understood why June had made those choices, it didn't change the fact that her life had been built on a lie. It didn't change the fact that her real family had been out there, searching for her, while she grew up believing she was someone else. Leonard Ashford's words echoed in her mind. "I never stopped searching for you." She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to picture herself as Olivia Ashford, the lost heiress to a fortune, to a life she couldn't even begin to comprehend. But all she could see was the little girl in the portrait, frozen in time, a stranger to herself. "Do you think he's telling the truth?" Eliza asked suddenly, opening her eyes to look at June. "About the accident? About everything?" June hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "I don't know, sweetheart. I don't know much about the Ashfords, not beyond what everyone else hears. But I do believe he's your grandfather. I believe he's been searching for you. And now that he's found you, I don't think he's going to let you go again." That thought sent a shiver down Eliza's spine. The idea of being pulled into the Ashford family, of being claimed by them, wasn't something she was ready for. But at the same time, there was a part of her, deep down, that needed to know more. Needed to understand who she really was, what had happened to her parents, and why her life had taken such a drastic turn. "I don't know if I want that life," Eliza admitted. "I don't know if I want to be a Ashford." June reached across the table, taking her hand in both of hers, her touch warm and familiar. "You don't have to be anyone you don't want to be, Eliza. It doesn't matter what your last name is or where you come from. You're my daughter, and that will never change. But if you want to know more, if you want to find out what happened, I'll stand by you. Whatever you choose." Eliza nodded, the knot in her chest loosening just a little. She didn't have all the answers yet. There was still so much she didn't understand. But as long as she had June by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. "Thanks, Mom," she said softly. June smiled through her tears, her hand tightening around Eliza's. "Whatever you need, honey. Always." Eliza stood outside the Ashford mansion, staring up at its imposing facade. A week ago, this house had been nothing more than a job, a way to make some quick money. Now, it loomed large in her life, a shadowy link to a past she didn't know existed. She gripped the strap of her purse tightly, the nerves in her stomach swirling. This wasn't just a place anymore, it was the key to unraveling who she really was. Leonard had called her that morning, his voice as tired as it had been when he left her doorstep days ago. He'd asked her to come back, to talk. She knew she needed answers, needed to understand what had happened all those years ago. So here she was, standing in front of the grand house that now seemed so much heavier with meaning. With a deep breath, she walked up the steps and knocked. The door swung open almost immediately, as though someone had been waiting for her. A housekeeper she didn't recognize led her inside, down a long hall lined with portraits. She glanced at them as they passed, wondering if any of these faces shared her blood. Leonard was waiting for her in the same study she'd seen briefly before. He sat in an overstuffed chair by the window, looking even friendlier than before, though his sharp eyes brightened when she entered. He motioned for her to sit in the chair opposite him. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice hoarse but filled with a quiet resolve. "I know this is overwhelming for you, Eliza, Olivia, I suppose." "Please," Eliza interrupted, her voice firmer than she felt. "I'm still Eliza." Leonard nodded, understanding. "Of course. Eliza." The silence that followed was thick with things unsaid, with the weight of the truth hanging between them. "I need to know about my parents," Eliza said, breaking the silence. Her words felt heavy, as though they had been building in her chest for days, finally pushing their way out. What happened to them? Why were they running? Leonard sighed deeply, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for a glass of water on the table beside him. Your parents, Celeste and Owen, they were good people. But something happened. Something I didn't fully understand, even back then. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. They were being followed. Stalked, I suppose. It started off as strange letters, threats that seemed harmless at first. But it escalated. They didn't tell me everything. I only found out later how bad it had gotten. Who was following them? Eliza asked, her voice soft but insistent. I wish I knew, Leonard admitted. I've spent years trying to find that answer. Your parents were terrified by the end, enough to consider leaving everything behind. But whoever it was, they kept their identity hidden. I don't think Celeste or Owen ever knew for sure who was after them. Eliza's heart ached as she imagined her parents living in fear, unsure of who was hunting them down. They were going to run? Leonard nodded. They made plans to leave, to disappear for a while, hoping the danger would pass. I told them it was too drastic, that we could fight it. But they were adamant. And then, the accident. Eliza swallowed hard. The word accident felt wrong, like it didn't fully capture the depth of the tragedy. Was it really an accident? She asked. Leonard looked away for a moment, his expression hard to read. The police said it was a car crash. But given everything that was happening, I've always had my doubts. Eliza felt a chill run through her. All this time, she'd thought her parents had died in a simple crash, but now it seemed like it could have been so much more. A part of her was almost afraid to dig deeper, to uncover more truths that might unravel everything she believed about her past. Leonard leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on her. I couldn't protect them, Eliza. I couldn't save my daughter. But now that I've found you, I need to make sure you're safe. Eliza clenched her hands together in her lap, her mind spinning with questions. Why had her parents been targeted? Why had she been left in an orphanage without a trace of who she really was? There were still too many missing pieces, too much she didn't understand. Leonard reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, delicate object. This was your mother's, he said, his voice softening. He held out a silver locket, the metal worn with age but still gleaming. She wore it every day. Eliza took the locket in her hands, her fingers brushing over the cool surface. It was simple, oval-shaped, with intricate engravings she couldn't quite make out. She pressed the small clasp, and the locket popped open. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded but still clear enough to recognize. Her heart skipped a beat. It was a picture of a man and a woman, her parents, she realized, and a baby. A baby who must have been her. Her mother, Celeste, had the same dark hair that Eliza had, and her father's eyes looked so familiar, like they were staring right through the years and into her now. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she blinked them away, feeling a surge of emotions she couldn't quite name. She'd never had anything from them before, no keepsake, no physical reminder of who they were. And now, in her hand, she held this small piece of her past, a family she couldn't remember but somehow still felt connected to. I thought you should have it, Leonard said, his voice thick with emotion. It's the one thing of hers I could never bring myself to let go of. But it belongs to you. Eliza closed the locket carefully, feeling the weight of it in her palm. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a link to her parents, to a life that had been stolen from her. She slipped the chain around her neck, the locket resting against her chest, where it seemed to settle into place like it had always belonged there. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Leonard watched her, his expression a mixture of sadness and relief. There's so much more I wish I could tell you, but I'm afraid I don't have all the answers you're looking for. I've tried, Eliza. I've searched for years. But whoever was behind this, they were good at hiding. Eliza nodded, her thoughts swirling with questions she still didn't know how to ask. But for now, the locket was enough. It was a start, a glimpse into the life she never knew, and it gave her the strength to keep looking for the rest of the story. Eliza stood once more in front of the Ashford mansion, her chest tightening as she stared at the sprawling estate that had once been her home. It was strange, she thought, how a place so familiar and yet so foreign could stir something deep inside her. There were no clear memories, no snapshots from her childhood she could cling to, but there was a pull, a sense that this house held pieces of her past she was only now ready to uncover. Leonard had given her permission to explore, to find whatever traces of her former life might still linger within the walls. It felt like an invitation to step back into a part of herself she had long forgotten, and even though her nerves hummed with uncertainty, she couldn't resist the need to know. The door opened as she approached, and the housekeeper, whom Eliza now knew as Greta, greeted her with a nod. "Mr. Ashford said you'd be coming," Greta said gently, her tone more respectful than it had been during Eliza's last visit. "Everything's ready for you upstairs. Take as much time as you need." Eliza offered a tight smile and followed Greta through the halls. The air in the mansion was still, the soft padding of her footsteps on the thick carpet the only sound in the vast space. As they reached the grand staircase, Eliza found herself staring up at the portraits lining the walls, faces of Ashford ancestors gazing down at her with eyes that seemed to know secrets she had yet to uncover. Greta led her to a large, sunlit room on the second floor, the room that had once been hers. "This was your nursery," Greta said softly, gesturing inside. "It's been untouched for years. After the accident, we never had the heart to change it." Eliza stepped inside, her heart squeezing as she took in the soft pastel walls, the delicate furniture, the plush toys scattered neatly on a shelf. It was like stepping into a time capsule, preserved exactly as it had been when she was a child. She walked over to the small bed, running her fingers along the faded quilt. A flicker of a memory passed through her, a woman's soft laugh, the warmth of her mother's hand brushing her cheek as she tucked her in. She blinked, the memory slipping away as quickly as it had come, leaving behind only a hollow ache. "There's more to see," Greta said gently. "Whenever you're ready." Eliza nodded, pulling herself back to the present. She followed Greta down the hall, past more rooms, until they stopped in front of a large, ornate door. "This was your parents' room," Greta said, her voice reverent, as though the room held sacred ground. Eliza pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside. The room was grand, but not in the cold, impersonal way some of the rest of the mansion felt. This room was warm, lived in, filled with small, intimate touches that spoke of a family that had once thrived here. A vase of dried flowers sat on a table by the window. A book was left half-read on the nightstand, its pages yellowed with time. Everything felt frozen in the moment just before her parents' lives had been taken. As Eliza moved deeper into the room, something stirred in her, a faint sense of recognition. She could almost see her parents sitting by the window, their laughter filling the room, her mother's arms wrapping around her father's shoulders as they watched her play on the floor. A flicker of another memory surfaced, her small feet pounding against the floor, the frantic beating of her heart as she ran, her mother's voice urging her to hide. "Hide, sweetie. Stay very quiet. Don't come out until I say so." Eliza's breath caught, the memory so vivid it made her stomach clench. She could feel the fear, the urgency in her mother's voice. She had been hiding, running from something or someone. But from what? Her eyes swept the room, her pulse quickening. There had been a place, a hiding spot her mother had shown her. She crossed to the far wall, where her fingers brushed along the wooden paneling, searching for something she couldn't quite name. Her fingertips caught on a slight groove in the wall, and she pressed, heart thudding in her chest. The panel shifted slightly, just enough to reveal a small hidden space behind it. A gasp escaped her lips. It was still there. The nook her mother had shown her, where she would hide when they played games of hide and seek. She reached inside, her fingers brushing against something cool and smooth. She pulled it out slowly, her heart skipping a beat as she looked down at what she held. It was a leather-bound book, worn and creased from years of being hidden away. Her mother's diary. Eliza's breath caught in her throat as she stared at it, her fingers trembling as she opened the cover. Inside, the delicate handwriting of her mother filled the pages, soft and looping, with the first entry dated a few months before the accident. She sat down on the floor, her back against the wall, and began to read. May 3rd. I'm starting to feel uneasy. There have been too many strange incidents lately, things I can't explain, people I don't recognize watching us from a distance. Owen tells me I'm imagining things, but I know something isn't right. I just don't know who to trust anymore. Eliza's heart pounded as she flipped through the pages, her mother's worry growing with each entry. May 27th. The letters keep coming. Threats. No return address. They know where we live. They know about Olivia. I'm terrified. June 15th. We've decided to leave. There's no other option. The police say there's no credible threat, but we can't take that risk. We're going to disappear for a while, go somewhere safe. Owen has a plan. We'll come back when this is all over. The entries stopped there, cut off by the events that had shattered their lives. Eliza sat in stunned silence, her mother's fear and desperation lingering in the words, painting a picture of the life she had never known. Her parents had been running. They had planned to leave, to escape whatever danger had been following them. But something had gone wrong. Eliza closed the diary, her hands shaking. The fear she had felt in that fleeting memory of running and hiding hadn't been a game. Her mother had been protecting her, trying to keep her safe from a threat Eliza still didn't fully understand. Eliza sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding as she opened her mother's diary once more. The discovery of the hidden nook had shaken her, and the revelation that her parents had been living in fear, hunted by a mysterious stalker, left her feeling raw and exposed. As she flipped through the pages, the faint scent of old paper filling the air, the fear her mother must have felt seemed to rise from the pages, filling the room with a heavy tension. The diary's entries started out simple enough. Everyday musings, snippets about Eliza, no, Olivia, as a baby, and the occasional note about dinners or events. But soon, the tone changed. Each entry became more frantic, more weighed down by the terror of what was happening to them. June 5th. Another letter arrived today. It was left on the windshield of our car, even though I'm sure it was locked. There's no signature, no name, but the message is clear: I'm watching. Owen thinks I'm overreacting, that it's some kind of cruel prank. But I know better. I can feel it. Someone is out there, waiting. Eliza's stomach twisted as she read. The idea that her mother had lived in such fear, day after day, without knowing who was tormenting her, filled her with a deep sadness. She could almost hear her mother's voice in the back of her mind, speaking the words in the same loving, protective tone that filled the room with warmth, except now, it was tainted with panic. June 10th. The letters keep coming. Owen tried to reassure me, but I can see the doubt in his eyes now. He's worried too, though he doesn't want to admit it. I found another one in Olivia's room today. How did they get in? The doors were locked, the windows shut tight. And yet, it was there, sitting on her crib like a twisted calling card. You can't protect her forever. Eliza felt a shudder run down her spine. The thought of someone breaking into the house, leaving messages in her room when she was just a child, sent a cold chill through her. It was like a nightmare, and yet it was real. Her mother had lived this, suffered through this, trying to protect her baby from a danger she couldn't see. The entries grew more desperate as the days passed. June 15th. We've hired a private security firm. The police aren't doing enough, they don't believe us. They keep saying there's no evidence, no proof of who's behind this. But the letters won't stop. I'm scared all the time, constantly looking over my shoulder. I don't know how much longer we can live like this. Owen is talking about leaving, disappearing for a while. It sounds so extreme, but maybe it's the only way. Maybe if we vanish, the stalker will lose interest. Eliza's heart raced as she read the words. The idea of leaving everything behind, going into hiding, must have seemed like a last resort. Her parents must have been so desperate, so terrified, that the thought of abandoning their lives seemed safer than staying. But what kind of person could have driven them to such extremes? And why? She flipped the page, eager to uncover more, to understand what had ultimately pushed her parents to run. June 18th. We've made the decision. We're leaving tomorrow. Owen has arranged everything. We're going somewhere no one can find us, at least for a little while. We'll come back when it's safe, when we know the stalker is gone. It feels like the only option left, but it also feels like a surrender. I don't want to leave, but I have to protect Olivia. I have to keep her safe. She's all that matters now. Eliza's throat tightened. She could imagine her mother packing up their things, making plans with her father, preparing for a life in hiding. Her mother had been willing to sacrifice everything, her home, her safety, her normal life, to keep Eliza safe. It was a weight Eliza hadn't fully realized until now. The next entry was the last one. June 19th. This will be the last time I write in this diary for a while. Owen says we need to cut all ties, to leave everything behind, including this. He's right, but I'm scared. Scared that we won't be able to come back. Scared that something will go wrong. We're heading to a cabin in the mountains. Owen found it, somewhere remote. No one knows about it. We'll stay there for a year, maybe longer, until it's safe to return. If you're reading this, Olivia, know that everything we did for you. I love you more than words can say. Be strong, my sweet girl. Eliza closed the diary, her hands shaking. Her parents had been planning to disappear, to hide away in the mountains for a year. It was all so clear now. But one question gnawed at her, refusing to let go. Why didn't they come back? They had planned to return after a year, but something had stopped them. Her mother had died in the accident, Eliza knew that much, but why hadn't her father come back? Why hadn't anyone from the Ashford family found her sooner? She glanced down at the address her mother had scribbled in the margins of the last page, the location of the cabin they had planned to flee to. It was somewhere in the mountains, miles away from the city. A place where no one would think to look for them. Her mind whirled with possibilities. Could that cabin hold the answers she was looking for? Had something happened there that had kept her father away, that had kept her hidden for so long? She stood up, clutching the diary to her chest. There was no way she could sit still now, no way she could ignore the gnawing curiosity inside her. She had to know what had happened. She had to go to that cabin and see for herself. The winding mountain road stretched ahead of them, cutting through dense forests and towering pines. Eliza sat in the passenger seat, her fingers gripping the armrest as Leonard navigated the twists and turns with steady hands. The silence in the car was thick with tension, the weight of their mission pressing down on both of them. The cabin, the one her mother had written about, was buried deep in the mountains, miles away from the nearest town. Leonard had insisted on accompanying her, and Eliza hadn't argued. As much as she felt conflicted about her place in the Ashford family, there was a connection between them now, one that neither could ignore. Besides, she wasn't sure she wanted to face whatever was waiting for her up there alone. "Are you sure we're on the right track?" she asked, her voice cutting through the stillness. Leonard nodded, his eyes focused on the road ahead. "The directions your mother left in the diary matched the maps I had drawn up years ago. I searched for this place once, long ago, but I didn't have the full picture then. Now we do. Eliza glanced out the window, the towering peaks rising like silent sentinels around them. The isolation of the area struck her. It was the kind of place people disappeared to, a place where the world could forget about you if you let it. Her parents must have thought they could find safety here, away from whoever had been stalking them. But something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. I still can't believe he's alive, she murmured. The thought of meeting her father, a man she had no memory of, felt surreal. After all this time. Leonard's grip tightened on the steering wheel. I never gave up hope, he said quietly. Even when everything pointed to the worst, I kept looking. I should have done more, but, well, we're here now. We'll find him. The road narrowed as they approached the cabin, and Leonard slowed the car, easing it to a stop in front of a clearing. The cabin stood at the edge of the forest, nestled between tall trees that cast long shadows over its wooden structure. It was smaller than Eliza had imagined, rustic and weathered by time, but there was something almost peaceful about it. She could see why her parents had chosen this place to hide. Eliza stepped out of the car, her breath catching as she took in the scene. The air was crisp, cooler up here in the mountains, and the sounds of the forest surrounded them, birds calling from the trees, the rustle of leaves in the wind. For a moment, she felt disconnected from the world, as if she were stepping into a forgotten past. This is it, Leonard said, joining her. He looked around, his eyes scanning the area as if searching for signs of life. The cabin where your parents were supposed to start over. Eliza swallowed hard, her heart racing as she approached the front door. She reached out, her fingers brushing the weathered wood. It felt strange, almost like she was crossing into another life, a life she should have lived but had been stolen from her. Leonard gave her a nod of encouragement, and together, they pushed the door open. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, the air thick with the scent of dust and aged wood. Sunlight filtered through the dirty windows, casting a dim glow over the room. It looked like no one had lived here for a long time, furniture covered in sheets, empty shelves, and the faint remnants of what could have been a home, long abandoned. Eliza stepped further inside, her eyes sweeping over the small space. It was a far cry from the Ashford mansion, but it felt significant, like this place held answers. "Do you think he's still here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Leonard could respond, a sound from outside caught their attention, the crunch of footsteps on the gravel. Eliza froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Someone was approaching the cabin. Leonard moved quickly, stepping in front of her protectively, his body tense. The door swung open again, and for a moment, the figure standing in the doorway was nothing more than a shadow, backlit by the fading afternoon sun. But as the man stepped inside, his features came into view, and Eliza felt her breath catch in her chest. He was older than she'd expected, his hair streaked with gray and his face lined with years of hardship, but there was no mistaking it. This was her father. "Owen," Leonard whispered, the shock evident in his voice. "It's really you." Eliza's father, Owen, looked between them, his eyes landing on Eliza and widening in disbelief. He took a step forward, his voice hoarse. "Olivia?" Eliza blinked, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent so many years wondering about this man, about who her father had been. And now, here he was, standing in front of her, alive. "It's Eliza now," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I go by Eliza." Owen's expression crumpled, emotion flooding his face as he stumbled toward her. He reached out, his hands shaking as if he couldn't believe she was real. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I've been looking for you, for so long. I didn't think I'd ever see you again." Eliza felt tears sting her eyes as she reached out, letting him pull her into a tight embrace. It was awkward at first, this man she didn't know, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, but something in his touch felt familiar, like a part of her had always known him. I'm here, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm here. They stood like that for a moment, clinging to each other, until Owen pulled back, wiping at his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at Leonard, nodding gratefully, before turning back to Eliza. I have so much to explain, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of years. So much I need to tell you. Eliza nodded, her mind spinning with questions. What happened, Dad? Why didn't you come back? Why didn't you find me? Owen sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as if the burden of the truth had been too much to carry alone for all these years. He gestured for them to sit, and they gathered around the small, dusty table in the center of the room. We thought we had it all planned out, Owen began, his voice rough. We were going to stage the accident, make it look like we died, and disappear. Your mother and I were so scared. We didn't know who was after us, but the threats were getting worse. We thought if we could just vanish, we could keep you safe. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. But something went wrong. After the crash, we got separated. I was taken to a hospital miles away, and by the time I recovered, you were gone. I searched everywhere, but no one could tell me what had happened to you. I didn't even know if you were alive. Eliza listened in stunned silence, her heart aching for the man in front of her. He had spent years searching for her, just like Leonard, never knowing she had been adopted, that she had been living a life completely disconnected from her past. Your mother, Owen's voice faltered, his eyes filled with pain. She died not long after. She couldn't take it. Losing you broke her heart. Eliza felt a lump rise in her throat. The mother she had never known, the woman who had tried so desperately to protect her, had died believing she had lost everything. I'm so sorry, Olivia, Owen said, his voice thick with emotion. I should have found you sooner. I should have. Eliza reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. It's not your fault, she whispered, her voice breaking. We're here now. We found each other. Owen squeezed her hand tightly, his eyes brimming with tears. I never stopped looking, he said. Not for a single day. Eliza nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. They had been lost for so long, separated by lies and tragedy. But now, sitting across from her father, with Leonard by her side, she knew they could finally start to piece their broken family back together. The crisp mountain air carried a sense of renewal as Eliza stood on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunrise bathe the valley in soft golden light. It had been days since she reunited with her father, Owen, and her grandfather, Leonard. Days spent sifting through years of loss and pain, piecing together their broken history, and slowly finding a way forward. The cabin, once a symbol of her parents' fear and desperation, now felt like the beginning of something new. Eliza had expected to feel overwhelmed by the weight of her past, but instead, she felt lighter. The secrets, the lies, the fear that had shaped her life, it all seemed to melt away with the morning sun. There were still scars, of course. She hadn't forgotten the danger that had chased her family into hiding, the stalker who had terrorized them. But with her father by her side, those threats felt distant now, like shadows that no longer had the power to control her. Inside the cabin, her father and grandfather sat at the small wooden table, talking quietly. Their conversations had been slow, careful. Too many years had passed without them, too much pain lingered between them. But they were here, together, and that was enough for now. It was a new beginning. Eliza stepped back inside, the floorboards creaking under her feet. Both men looked up as she entered, and Owen gave her a small smile, one that still carried the weight of regret, but also hope. Morning, he said, his voice still a little rough from emotion. Morning, Eliza replied, crossing the room to join them. She glanced at the worn diary that lay between them on the table, her mother's words still haunting but now part of a larger story, one that she was determined to finish. I was thinking, maybe we could head back to the city soon. There are some things I need to take care of. Leonard raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Are you sure you're ready? Eliza nodded, her decision already made. I've been thinking about it a lot. It's time to go back. There's no more running. Owen, quiet until now, reached for her hand across the table. His touch was tentative, but it carried the weight of all the time they had lost. We'll follow your lead, Eliza. Whatever you need, we're here. She squeezed his hand gently, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. It wasn't going to be easy to rebuild the family they'd lost, but they had time now. And that was all she needed. The drive back to the city felt different this time. Less tense, less full of questions. Eliza's thoughts shifted from the past to the future, one that no longer seemed out of reach. When they arrived, the Ashford mansion stood as imposing as ever, but this time, it didn't intimidate her. She wasn't stepping into someone else's world anymore, she was stepping into her own. The first person she visited wasn't Leonard, though. It was June. Eliza pulled up outside the modest house she'd grown up in, her heart pounding in her chest. June had been a constant in her life, the woman who had raised her, who had loved her unconditionally, even when it meant keeping difficult secrets. Now, as Eliza prepared to move forward with the Ashfords, she couldn't leave June behind. When she knocked on the door, June answered quickly, as if she'd been waiting for her. Eliza, June said, her voice soft, her expression cautious. I didn't expect to see you so soon. I couldn't go forward without coming back, Eliza replied, stepping inside the familiar home. The smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen hit her, and for a moment, everything felt normal, like it always had been. But they both knew things had changed. June sat down at the small table, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them in her lap. How did it go? Did you find him? Eliza nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. I did. He's alive. My father, he's alive. June's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for Eliza's hand across the table. Oh, Eliza. I'm so happy for you. Eliza squeezed her hand gently, her voice soft. I'm happy too. But I want you to come with me, June. I want you to be part of this new chapter in my life. June blinked, her expression startled. What do you mean? I know things are different now, Eliza said, her voice steady. But you're my mother too. You raised me, you loved me. And I don't want to leave you behind. We can get you the help you need, better health care. I want you with me. June looked at her, tears slipping down her cheeks, and nodded slowly. I didn't expect this, Eliza. I didn't expect you to still need me. I'll always need you, Eliza said, her voice thick with emotion. You're part of my life, no matter what. It took some time to arrange everything, but soon enough, June was moved into a new apartment, closer to the Ashford estate. She would have access to better doctors, the care she needed as her health declined. And most importantly, she wouldn't be alone. As for Eliza, she had her own decisions to make. Leonard had offered her everything, the Ashford name, the legacy, the businesses, a life of wealth and privilege. But after everything she'd been through, Eliza knew that wasn't what she wanted. She couldn't be trapped in the Ashford world, defined by their legacy. She needed to carve out her own path. I'm going back to school, she told Leonard one evening, after they had settled June in her new place. I want to finish what I started before all this happened. Leonard looked at her with pride, his smile soft. I'm glad you're choosing what's right for you. Your mother would have been proud. Eliza smiled, her heart light. Thank you. I know this isn't what you had planned, but it's what I need. You're a Ashford, but you're also Eliza, Leonard said, his voice full of warmth. You can be both. And so, With the support of her newfound family and the love of the woman who had raised her, Eliza began to look toward the future. She enrolled in classes, determined to complete her education, to forge her own identity outside of the Ashford name. The scars of the past were still there, but they no longer defined her. The threat that had once loomed over her family had faded into the background, and while the stalker's identity remained a mystery, it no longer haunted her. She had survived. Her father had survived. And now, they had the chance to build something new together. As she walked across the campus one crisp fall morning, her books tucked under her arm, Eliza felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was no longer lost in the chaos of her past. She was no longer running from shadows. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. Free to be Eliza. Free to dream. Free to live. And that was all she had ever really wanted.